Well, that's the big announcement of the afternoon. Donohue's not running. One down, a few more to go. Tom, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you to all of you for having me today. What I'd like to do is just speak to you a little bit about the issues that I see out in the country as I'm traveling around now, the state of play I see in the governor's races across the country, and then take questions from all of you about things that you're interested in. As chairman of the Republican Governors Association, I feel like I have one of the best jobs in the country in this election cycle, because I'm actually selling something that people can grasp onto. You know, what happens in state houses, what governors do in state houses, or don't do, is really tangible and plausible for people, and the differentiation you can make between paths is very clear. See, here in this town, you know, everybody's got an excuse for why something doesn't get done. You know, the bill got amended in the subcommittee. There wasn't a quorum to move the bill from this house to the next house. We didn't schedule a vote. The White House didn't send us a clear signal. And everybody, by the time you get done hearing all that, it gets so moshed up that all you understand is that nothing's getting done. In each individual state, people know their governor. I tell this to members of Congress and the United States Senate all the time, with all due respect to them. Most of the people in their own state don't know who they are. But you know who your governor is. And what you expect from that man or woman is for them to produce results. Now, in 2010, we had a really outstanding election for our party that sent a lot of Republican governors, conservative, pro-growth, pro-Republican governors to office. And you have seen in state after state what has happened. You see in Florida, where Rick Scott became the governor of Florida, when he came into office, unemployment was at 11.1%. Under Charlie Christie, they had lost 845,000 jobs during his term. And in 3 years, Rick Scott has taken that unemployment rate below 6%, and 645,000 new private sector jobs have been created in Florida because he's cut taxes, he's cut regulation, and he's taken material steps to make the business environment better, more hospitable for people who want to not only work there but live there. In Wisconsin, Scott Walker took a state that was completely dysfunctional and took the difficult steps that were necessary to lower property taxes through reform of the collective bargaining system, cut income taxes, cut business taxes, and you're once again now seeing growth in Wisconsin, which had been stagnant for years under his predecessor. In Michigan, in the birthplace of the UAW, you saw Governor Rick Snyder make Michigan a right-to-work state. Now, that's just 3 examples. You could talk about John Kasich in Ohio and the changes that he's made there, which has led to enormous growth in the job market in Ohio. You could talk about Susana Martinez in a blue state like New Mexico, who is sitting today with a double-digit lead because she's creating jobs and lowering taxes in New Mexico. Nikki Haley in South Carolina, where you see more manufacturers moving into South Carolina because she has stood up and done the right things in South Carolina to make that a more hospitable business environment. And as a result, you have people moving to South Carolina. Now you can look at the alternative. How about the races we lost in 2010? We always love to talk about the ones we won. Let's talk about the ones we lost. We lost Connecticut by 6,400 votes in 2010. And what's happened? Governor Dan Malloy, the Democrat, stood up and he said during the debate in 2010, let me be clear, the last thing we're going to do is raise taxes. And then he instituted the largest income tax increase in Connecticut history. Connecticut is now last in America among all the states in job growth. And in the last Gallup poll, 50% of residents of Connecticut say they're looking to move. That's the kind of leadership you get from a Democratic governor like Dan Malloy. Let's look at Illinois, a race that we lost by 10,000 votes in 2010. Pat Quinn has that state on the edge of bankruptcy. He is completely beholden to the public sector unions. And he has raised taxes. He, in fact, raised taxes 67%. Income taxes were increased in Illinois. And what's happened? Job growth moving backwards, companies moving to Wisconsin and Michigan and Iowa. and out of Illinois. Let's look at another race that we lost. We lost in states across the country where you now see Democratic governors who are getting ready to be thrown out, like Malloy, like Quinn, and in Massachusetts, where Governor Patrick is now term limited. But we're ahead in a race in Massachusetts because what they understand is that despite the great educational system there at the higher ed level, that they are not getting the type of high-tech pharma jobs that they need in Massachusetts because the government has made it so expensive to operate in a state like Massachusetts. My point in bringing up these contrasts is twofold. First is I think it was the president who said that elections have consequences. Yes, they do, Mr. President. Elections have consequences, and you ask the people in these individual states about the consequences that have been driven by those results in 2010, both positive and negative. Second is the argument for why these elections matter even more than the United States Senate. I know there's great obsession in the country right now about who's going to control the Senate. I care about that too. And I hope that my party takes over the U.S. Senate in 2 weeks. But let me tell you, my view is things in Washington have proven to be so dysfunctional under this president that if you really want, from a business perspective, to get things done in the next 2 years, you better hope for more Republican governors in more states where they will come in and do exactly the same thing that I've done and that those other governors that I mentioned and the ones that I haven't mentioned did. Lower taxes, lower regulation, deal with tort reform, deal with education reform so that we get a better educated workforce for you all to hire. Those are the things that need to be done. And right now, I've got 11 of the 36 governor's races inside the margin of error. 11 of 36. That can go either way. 5 of them on defense, 6 of them on offense. So that's why I'm leaving here, because I got to get to Illinois, where we're on offense. And then I'm going to Michigan, where we're on defense, still today. I'll be in 20 states this month. I've been in 35 states since December 1st. And the reason for that is that we can make a difference by electing more governors. And if all you're concerned about is 2016, let me suggest this to you, that if you have any chance of electing a Republican president, there's a bunch of things we need to do. But the first is to have a good bench of Republican candidates. And I am convinced that the next president of the United States is going to be a governor. And it needs to be. We have had the experiment of a legislator who's never run anything, getting on-the-job training in the White House. It has not been pretty. And so we need to have a big and broad bench of good, experienced Republican governors to select from in 2016. Secondly, what would you rather have if you're a Republican candidate and the nominee for president? Would you rather have Rick Scott in Florida overseeing the voting mechanism or Charlie Crist? Would you rather have Scott Walker in Wisconsin overseeing the voting mechanism, or would you rather have Mary Burke? Who would you rather have in Ohio? John Kasich or Ed Fitzgerald? Fact is, if you're just a pragmatist and you don't really care about what happens in the states, you're going to care about who's running those states in November of 2016. And what kind of political apparatus they set up and what kind of governmental apparatus they set up to ensure a full and fair election in 2016. All of those things are incredibly important. Let me say this, and then I'll take questions from all of you. The atmosphere in this country is one of great anxiety at the moment for a whole bunch of reasons, much of it emanating out of this town, and a lack of leadership. And I'm tired of listening to people complain about the fact that they can't get anything done. Fact of the matter is, if you want to get something done, you need to lead. And I don't want to hear this complaints because I'm from New Jersey. I mean, are you kidding? New Jersey, 750,000 more Democrats than Republicans. New Jersey, which hasn't elected a Republican to the United States Senate in 42 years. The longest streak of any state in America not to elect a Republican to the U.S. Senate. New Jersey, where they hadn't elected a Republican statewide in 12 years before I won in 2009. New Jersey, where I have a 24-16 deficit in the state Senate and a 48-32 deficit in the Assembly. I wake up every morning knowing two things. One, I'm not going to get everything I want, and two, I'm going to have a headache by the end of the day. And never once in the last 5 years have I used that as an excuse for not getting something done? Fact is, when you're the executive and you're in charge, your job is to get something done. Your job is to reach across the aisle and figure out ways to bring those people over. Sometimes it's by my charm and good looks. Sometimes it's by taking somebody out and giving them a beating publicly. You got to figure out which one works. But your job is to figure out which one works and to get things done. And in my view, we should not let people in public office off the hook anymore with all their excuses for why nothing's getting done. As my wife reminds me all the time when I do come home at times and occasionally complain about this job, she said, Chris, nobody put a gun to your head. Nobody forced you to do this. And it's absolutely true. I did this voluntarily twice. And so there's no excuses for not getting the job done. And we should be dismissing people. And I don't care whether they're from my party or the other party. No more excuses for not getting things done. No more excuses for why we're not leading. And what I've said to Republican candidates for governor all across this country, whether they're incumbents or challengers, is your job is to let people know where you want to lead and then move. Then move. And more of them will follow you than you can imagine if you lead and you lead in a strong way. It should come as no shock to you that not everybody in my state agrees with me. My state? No, they don't. So how did I get 61% of the vote for re-election last year in what is one of the bluest states in America as a conservative Republican governor? Because over and over and over again, I had people say to me, you know, I don't always agree with you, Governor, but at least I know what you think. I never have to wonder what your position is. I never have to wonder where you're trying to move us. Fact is, you got to be taking chances in this business. You got to tell people what you think. And you got to be willing to stand up and take the flack that's going to come along with it. See, we got to teach people that if they're looking for a candidate who they agree with 100% of the time, go home and look in the mirror. You're it. You're the only person you agree with 100% of the time. And if that's the standard we're going to hold people to, then you know what you're going to get out of political candidates? You're going to be liars. Because, by the way, we're pragmatists, too. We want to win. So if we think we have to tell you everything you want to hear in order to get your vote, we'll lie to you. And then we'll get into office and not do what we said we were going to do, and then you'll be more disillusioned with politics. How about just demanding from the beginning we tell you what we think? And don't penalize us for every small issue that we disagree with you on. Look at us and decide whether we're the type of leader, the type of person with the type of honesty and integrity who deserves the opportunity to lead. Make that your first choice. And then get to the checklist after that. Because the checklist changes every year. Every year. But what doesn't change is leadership and honesty and integrity. That's what doesn't change. So that's the message we're selling across the country that I think is really important. And I hope it's going to lead to a lot of success on Election Day 2 weeks from today. So I will stop there and take questions from all of you about what's on your mind, stuff I mentioned or stuff that I didn't mention. Who's got questions? And I think there are microphones around. Mr. Donahue.
Governor, you're going to hit 20 more states before the end of the year. What are the national issues that are having the most significant effect on the races for governor across the country?
The first one, of course, is jobs and the economy. No matter what state you're in, there's this great sense of anxiety about our economic future. People understand that things that are happening here in Washington, D.C. are, no matter what their governors do, are negatively affecting what can happen inside their states or a drag on their states. So tax policy along and how it intersects with jobs and the economy is the first issue. Second is education. People understand across the country that we have an educational system right now in this country that is geared towards the comfort of adults rather than the potential of children. Just so you know, we are absolutely in this country captives of the teachers union. Captives of the teachers union. In my state, the teachers union raises in dues every year $140 million a year in mandatory dues from their members every year, and they do not contribute a nickel to teacher salary, teacher health care, or teacher pensions. It's a $140 million slush fund to reward their friends and to intimidate their enemies. And all they care about is greater benefits, greater pay, and greater longevity for teachers, whether they're good or not, whether children are learning or not, whether our country is improving or not. Now, if we don't all understand that this is a fight we need to engage and engage now, who's going to run the education system in this country? the public sector union leaders or the parents of children in this country. That's a huge issue, Tom, that people are really concerned about, and they understand we need more charter schools. We need more school choice. We need competition like we have in the business community here to demand. If a public school is doing a great job, people will flock to it. They're already paying for it anyway. But you know what? If they're not doing a good job, there should be a competitor school that is doing a good job where a parent can choose to send their child. And you know the only reason we don't have that in this country that believes in the free enterprise system more than any country in America? Because we are saps for the teachers union. That's why. Because we don't want to offend them. Now, it's time to start offending people, because you know what? We're 24th in math and 27th in science in the industrialized world, and if we still think we're going to be the most prosperous country in the world by raising those type of children with those type of results, we're kidding ourselves. And the public's starting to understand it. And those of us in this room and others who are leaders, we better get on this train, because the other folks are taking our lunch every day on this issue, because we're unwilling to talk about it, and we're unwilling to look people in the eye and say it straight. Yes, ma'am.
Amanda Mackey with Senator Lisa Murkowski's office. I wanted to know what message are we sending when you're out talking about healthcare, given that the healthcare is largely changed since President Obama took office, and some Republicans have had to say, well, it's working. How are you selling that message across the country?
Well, I mean, listen, it's only my opinion. Each governor sells their own message their own way. The great power of the Republican Governors Association is we don't send manifestos out from our main office about what men or women have to be advocating for or against. But I'll just tell you my position. It doesn't work. It's a fiction. It doesn't work, and it should be repealed. However, Republicans have an obligation to come up with an alternative. What are we going to replace it with? What are we going to do to make sure people get provided health care across this country in a way that's affordable? This doesn't work. It's a failure. And we need to be clear about that. But we can't just be against something. We got to be for something. And we got to put our market-oriented, free enterprise ideas on the table for consideration by the American people, and we've got to articulate it in a clear, direct, and, by the way, simple way, so they can understand it directly. So we don't give them any kind of mumbo-jumbo, but we tell them exactly what it's going to mean. That's what we need to do, and that's what I'm telling folks when I go out there is, that's what we need to move towards. And by the way, the states have already voted on this, haven't they? The majority of the states rejected having state-based exchanges. Why? I'll tell you why I rejected it in New Jersey. It wasn't about politics. This was about a system where the federal government determines the rules, the federal government determines the costs, and I'm responsible for the results. No thanks. I don't think there's one CEO in this room who would take that deal. Someone else determines the price of your product, someone else determines the rules governed on how you're going to roll out your product, and you're responsible for whatever the results are. That's why 30-plus states said no thank you. Republicans and Democrats. That's why. Because it doesn't make any sense. Before we get all to the underlying costs and the inefficiency and the ineffectiveness of having a public health system that treats New Jersey the same way we treat Wyoming, put that aside. From a management perspective, it was a complete failure and flop from the beginning. It needs to be replaced. But as Republicans, we have to come out and say exactly what we're for. And I think there'll be plenty of time for that after this election. All the way in the back.
I'd like to know, are the teachers' unions responsible for the high number of children who come from home, who are homeless and are going to school? There was just a report on that on the NewsHour last week.
No, but what they're responsible for is this. They're responsible for not permitting a system which is flexible enough to deal with those children. You see, those children have a right to an education just like anybody else. Except what the teachers' union wants is exactly what they've always had. An 8 to 3 day, summers off, and not dealing with these children in a direct way. They need, listen, this is an answer to a question. It's not a debate, okay? You asked me a question, I'm giving you an answer. The teachers' union refuses to be flexible and allow states to be flexible to deal with those children and to deal with dysfunctional families in our urban areas. Now, there's a different educational approach that needs to be taken for children who come from difficult home settings or no home. That's different than a kid who comes from a suburban town with 2 intact parents who are coming home every night and saying, did you do your homework? How about the parents in our cities who are working 4 or 5 jobs to keep a roof over their head and don't get home until 11 or 12 o'clock at night to support their family? They don't have the time to sit there and say to their child, did you do your homework? Can I read with you? Can I review your homework with you? Well, that child cannot be dealt with the same as the child who has involved intact parents. And what the teachers union want is to convince you that what you need to do is just spend more money. Now, not to lengthen school day or school year, God forbid, because that means we'll have to work harder. So the fact of the matter is that we need to get a system in this country that adjusts to the needs of the children and maximizes their potential and doesn't worry about the main thrust of education policy in this country being 2 things. How much do you spend and how many benefits do teachers get? That's not a system that helps to educate our children.
Governor Christie, thank you for your comments. Let me just move this into a little bit different issue. As governor of New Jersey and head of the Republican Governors Association, can you talk a little bit about priorities for legal reform? What would be at the top of your list for legal reform?
Well, those are very separable. As governor of New Jersey, I have a Democratic state Senate and a Democratic Assembly. The chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee is a trial lawyer who, when I met him the first week in the governorship, and I asked him what kind of lawyer he was, he told me he was an ambulance chaser. Now, that makes prospects for tort reform in New Jersey less than optimal. But what I do believe is that there are states all over this country who are doing it right in terms of legal reform. Listen, everybody in this country wants to have a fair legal system which gives people the ability to be able to sue for appropriate causes and injuries. What we don't need is for that tort system to become an industry unto itself. And in America, that's what's happened. And so the kind of steps that we need to take is to take the incentives out of a system to just have this become an industry unto itself. And this is from a recovering lawyer. But the fact is that we don't need a system that's an industry unto itself. We need a system which is an appropriate one, which allows people who are injured or harmed to get some compensation for their grievances. But we do not need a system where, like the class action system we have set up in so many of the states and across the country today, where it's become a cottage industry unto itself, where before you even know whether there's harm, when there's rumor of harm, there's class action suits filed by the hundreds. That's the kind of system we have to stop. I don't think anybody in this country does not want to have an operating, fair civil justice system. But what we should refuse to have is a civil justice system that becomes an income generator for just a narrow group of people in this country who either have not been truly injured or whose injuries have been so trumped up by the legal system and what's permitted under statutes in individual states that the incentive is there not for a true redress of grievances, but the incentive is there just to generate revenue, because that revenue comes from someplace, and it hurts job growth, and it hurts income growth. The president wants to worry about income inequality. How about dealing with tort reform? You know, companies would have a lot more income to be able to pay to their folks in their businesses if they didn't have to worry about putting away the billions and tens of billions of dollars they have to put away for legal fees and legal settlements in the system that we have today. Maybe the president could talk a little bit about that when he dresses up the income inequality question, because I got to tell you the truth, I'm tired of hearing about the minimum wage. I really am. I don't think there's a mother or father sitting around a kitchen table tonight in America who are saying, you know, honey, if our son or daughter could just make a higher minimum wage, my God, all our dreams would be realized. Is that what parents aspire to for their children? They aspire to a greater growing America where their children have the ability to make much more money and have much greater success than they've had. And that's not about a higher minimum wage, everybody. So we should start talking about what our aspirations are and how they can be achieved, rather than the president playing to the lowest common denominator on a higher minimum wage. Other questions? Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. Listen, there's two ways that you attack the national debt, right? First is by spending less, second is by growing more. You know, in New Jersey, for instance, so that you know that I'm actually trying to do what I'm advocating we should do nationally, our state budget this year, fiscal year 15, spends less money in actual dollars, not projected growth and all that economic BS. In actual dollars, we spend less than we spent in fiscal year 08, 7 years ago. That's the way you don't add to your debt. You stop spending so much. Second, we need an economy that's growing, and we know how we can do that. Tort reform is one of the ways. Tax reform is another way to do it. And exploiting the country's natural resources in a way that's both responsible and will not only help us economically in terms of our growth in this country, but also will help us geopolitically in a way that we really need right now given the conditions we have around the world. So, you know, it's not a complicated plan. Spend less, grow more. Now, how you implement all those things are part of a longer conversation that I'd be happy to have with you sometime, not today. But the fact is that there are very simple ways to go about doing this. Pain will be involved. Pain will be involved. Some people will be made unhappy. And if you're in these jobs to have everybody love you, go home. I don't care whether they love me. I don't mind it, but I don't care. I want to be respected. And my mother taught me a long time ago, you know, if you have a choice between respect and love, pick respect. Because if you have a respectful relationship, a truly respectful relationship, love can happen. But if you have love without respect, it's not going to last. Now, of course, she was talking to me about women. But the fact of the matter is that this applies to politics just as much. It's another intense emotional relationship between you and who you decide to vote for. And what we should demand from people is that they be respected. And so when we do these things, it's going to mean some people are going to be angry. It's going to mean some people are going to feel it. But if they know exactly why you're doing what you're doing, then it's your job as the leader to sell that plan with the pain in order to get the long-term result, and that's what I think we need to do. I could take one more question, I think. Is there one more question? If not, oh, well, Mr. Donohue's getting up. That means I'm out of here. Listen, I want to thank all of you for what you do for our country, and I want to thank you for supporting us. I appreciate it very much, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.